So I think we'll get started, and I'm really excited to welcome Ciarra Greene here she's a faculty member at Northwest Indian College, and she and I go back quite a ways as colleagues and friends, and we're really excited to have her here. And she's going to be presenting about the genius of our ancestors, engineering of the past, present, and future. And I will let her take it away from here. Thanks, Ciarra, for being here.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Were these a couple things that you need to hit on still, Leah?
Oh, yes. Thank you. So just a few brief things about Zoom. We automatically have people muted when they come into the meeting because it just really helps our audio for everybody. But if you do want to share something, go ahead and unmute yourself, and there's a little image of the icon that you would click to do that. And then, but we ask that you stay muted the rest of the time because sometimes unexpected noises come up in the background, and that can just be really distracting for folks. And then please turn on your video if you have video capabilities on your laptop or device. We love to use this as an opportunity to meet colleagues and build community with others. And we will have a little bit of breakout group time, and it's possible you might want to share your screen. This is the button you would push to do that. I don't think that's going to be necessary for this particular meeting, but that, just so you know, that button allows you to share your desktop or your browser window with others in your group. And then the chat button is really helpful if you have a question, but you would rather type it than speak it out. You can go ahead and use the chat. And I can ask the question of C, or she might even just see it and respond to it. So that's another way you can ask questions. We may also use the chat to share links with you. And if you need to, for some reason, exit the full screen, just hit the escape key if you want to open up a browser window or something like that. Sometimes it's hard to find where you are because the view can take up your whole screen. So just hit escape. And then you can also minimize the speaker view and move that around your screen. If you need to view something, like sometimes we use Padlet, that's the way you could do that.
All right. Thank you for that. And, immemorial Sapóoq'is wíit'es, ka'inwas Nimiipuu kasliapo. I'm just going to mess around here for a second to make sure that you guys aren't seeing all your faces on the screen as well. So good evening, everybody. My name is Ciarra Greene. As Leah stated, I'm faculty at Northwest Indian College. I've been here about a year now, and I absolutely love my job. I was one of the people who always said, I absolutely don't want to be a teacher, and it's not that I didn't want to be a teacher, it was who and where I wanted to teach. So it was finding my passion. In this talk, I will definitely be transparent about that the genius of our ancestors, if you search it, aside from this talk, good colleagues of mine, John Waterhouse and Mary Marshall, have a similar talk, but very different in the same lens. So it's titled, I did steal their title, I'll say that, but ours is a little bit different focus with the plants and animals. And they're National Geographic explorers, and they travel the world speaking with indigenous people about science and their knowledge in their communities. So there is a link. I didn't include that link, but they do have something on the web that was filmed at OHSU that you can check out online. And it's pretty fascinating, their story and their travels. So that was partially the inspiration for this presentation this evening. And here you can see my human ancestors on the far right, my grandma, Betty Lou Byford. In the middle, Chief Pile of Clouds, he's my great-great-great-grandfather, a Nez Perce visionary and also a chief during the Nez Perce Wars in the late 1800s. And then on the far left is Lizzie Cayuse, a prominent spokeswoman for the Nez Perce Tribe. That's what it said in a newspaper. So she must have been quite the lady for a newspaper back in her day to say something like that. So I definitely carry each of these with me every day. And when I think about my ancestors, a lot of times these are who I think about, but as we go through the presentation, you'll see who else I'm thinking about. So I just wanted to break down the kind of abstract for this talk. Since time immemorial, so a lot of times I think people kind of just breeze over that and don't really give it much attention. So I wanted to break that down. What does since time immemorial mean? It's a phrase meaning time extending beyond the reach of memory, record, or tradition, indefinitely ancient, or ancient beyond memory or record. So I really like that thought because since time immemorial, I just think back, beyond when I can even imagine is how I look at it. So since time immemorial, engineering has been a feat perfected by the plant and animal relatives and throughout our traditional homelands. So we'll look at some examples from snowshoe rabbit or snowshoe hare and tule, and then I'll leave you with a couple other examples to think about. They served as our teachers in developing tools, structures, and protocols, allowing us to thrive then, now, and if we fulfill our responsibilities today, it will allow us to thrive into the future. So this webinar will provide some insight into the genius of our plant and animal relative ancestors. And I'll propose a couple classroom activities and then also some approaches to incorporating them into your classrooms tomorrow. So compiling resources is going to be a big part of that. In previous webinars, we've had folks express that they were uncomfortable maybe teaching things from a Native perspective when they themselves are not Native or Indigenous. So I thought, maybe it would be a good example to show that there are a lot of resources that you can use from the internet that are from Indigenous people. A lot of my examples will be Nez Perce, since that's who I am and where I'm from. But I think that's maybe what most teachers are looking for right now, is how to compile these resources rather, and myself included as a teacher, rather than start from scratch. So here's a map. Oh yeah, and in the introductions, if people wanted to just denote if you've tuned into one of the webinars I've done before, that might be helpful, just for my own knowledge. But this map shows, of course, the Northwest. We're all familiar with that. If you look in that dark orangish color, that is the Columbia River Basin, the greater basin of the Columbia River. So that's where we explain our homelands to be. So we stretch all the way down into Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana as well. And through the treaties and whatnot, our land mass, our homelands, our reservation more so, has been reduced to first the light green in 1855 treaty, and then the 1867 treaty is that dark green, and that's our present day reservation lines. I still see all the Northwest as my homeland, so most of us do. Sapóoq'is, a lot of people might be familiar with when, Nez Perce was the name that we were given by French traders and explorers, and yet that is not at all what we call ourselves. Sapóoq'is is what we called ourselves, and it means people who walked out of the mountains. And I always like to tell this because it's a really good example of lost in communication or lost in translation. And so Sapóoq'is meaning people who walked out of the mountains. And if you can imagine walking up to somebody not having any similar dialect or language to share, you would use sign language. And so if we imagine our nose as the mountains and people walking out, that would be a gesture. And so instead of people walking out of the mountains, they said, oh, they're pierced nose people. So instantly we were called the Nez Perce, or Nez Perce in French. But that's not exactly who we are. Sapóoq'is, and today we call ourselves Nimiipuu, the people. So I always like to start out my classes with this, webinars, lectures, anything like that, with the land acknowledgement. And so being with Northwest Indian College, our mission is to support and foster learning through generations and dissemination of knowledge. And we acknowledge that here at our site in Nez Perce Site Campus, we're on the original homelands of the Nimiipuu, of the past, the present, and the future. And so we acknowledge the entirety of this history, as such, the lost in translation of our name, and of this place, so of the land itself, and we honor that and place gratitude with ourselves, the land, and the people who have stewarded it for generations. So just real quickly, if you do know whose homelands you are on, go ahead and put that in the chat box. I think that might be, or were we going to break out? I think just chat box on this one. Chat box. So if you do know whose homelands you are on, that would be great to acknowledge that in your introduction. Otherwise, if you aren't aware, that might be one of the first steps in kind of taking on this endeavor that we're going to go through together and bringing these perspectives into your classroom. So I'm just going to take a quick peek here while people are still typing those in. Oops. All right, cool. I'm glad you all seem to be aware. And if not, you know, again, that's a great place to start. There's some resources online. I didn't add that one, but there's a map that one of my friends has been developing, and instead of saying Nez Perce is the homelands you're on, it says the Nimiipuu. So it's really honoring those people of those places. So thank you guys for sharing that. I think that's really valuable. We take the time to do that. So here's where I like to start this talk. Itziyaya, so Coyote, he's one of our tricksters, one of our teachers as well. Actually, one of our main teachers. And so up here you can see a couple quotes from elders of ours. Move this over here. So this one from Leroy Seth, I actually got to give him a hug today, and he was kind of grilling our Department of Natural Resources with a lot of questions. Every presentation, it seemed like he had a comment or question, so I appreciate that one, elders. Keep us whippersnappers in check. So his quote says, "Our animal legends have a lot more truth to them than many may think, and there are a lot of lessons we can learn from our brothers and sisters who live on the land, in the air, and water. It is important to observe animals and pay close attention to them and do things that will preserve them. If we lose the animals because of pollutions which we have made, we will be next." And then another quote down here by Ronald Pinkham. It says, "In Nez Perce lore, the coyote is a mystical being who can change himself into anything he wants. He is a being who makes all the mistakes a human can make, and he has to learn." So fortunately for us, we have in the winter time is our time to tell stories, and it seems like these stories can go on for days and months at a time. But Itziyaya, Coyote's always at the center, and he's always, as stated here, he's always making mistakes, which teach us don't do it that way, or he's making mistakes and having others teach him a lesson. And sometimes he's doing miraculous things where like, hey, I actually do want to be like Coyote. So he's one of our main teachers, and he's when we see Coyote, we always kind of pause and think, you know, we need to check ourselves. Like, where are we at? What are we doing? Is this right, wrong? Whenever we see him, it's a sign for us to be mindful of what it is we're up to. Don't always want to be like Itziyaya. So I like to share this slide. On this right, or wait, no, on this left, was a drawing that I did in a collaborative process with some other students, and before I even went into any sort of teaching program. And this is what I had drawn. So I hadn't thought much about teaching in light of standards, in light of really anything. It was just, you know, what does it mean to be a teacher to you, and what does education look like? And so Itziyaya was, of course, the center of what I drew. He's the teacher of a lifetime. And on the kind of bottom right there, I said, culture is the foundation of education. And I put all these values up here. And again, now that I look back on some of the things I did previously, I really see how it built through my time as a teacher and teaching. But when I made this, it was, I really didn't think much of it. I just thought, oh, this is just a fun activity to do with students or do with others who want to be teachers. But those cultural values we'll come back to. In these pictures here, you can see in this top kind of middle picture of myself, I'm digging what's one of our main medicines, cows. In the next picture to the right is my uncle who's picking tea, mountain tea. In the top right is some roots, one of our traditional roots. Of course, in the bottom, we can probably all identify that as a moose and my uncle, my nephew with a salmon, and my little brother with a deer. And in these pictures, you know, going out on these lands and doing all these traditional gathering and fishing and hunting practices, it isn't just gathering the meat, it isn't just catching the fish or getting the foods and the medicines. All of that comes with life lessons of patience and observation, experience, group and teamwork, collaboration, finishing something from beginning to end. A lot of times, yeah, all the kids are really, you know, anxious to go fishing, but then when it comes to cleaning the fish and filleting them and packaging them up, they're like, you know, slowly one at a time start to disappear. So we were taught these things at a young age to follow through and see to it that anything that we took the life of, whether it be plant or animal, that we see to it that it's taken care of as it completes its journey to nourish our bodies or our mind, body, and spirit. So I really just like to share this slide and a little bit of my upbringing and what it looks like over here in Idaho and what a typical weekend, doesn't matter the time of the year, might look like for us. So going back to those cultural values, I had this discussion with my students just yesterday or today in my ecology class, and you know, I told them, I said, if you learn the water cycle, if you know the cycle that phosphorus goes through, that's great. But if we don't understand these values, then what is it that we're actually going to make an impact? You know, are we just going to be continuing in our diagrams? It was all these red arrows of human impacts, negative human impacts. I said, are we going to be blue arrows because we are mindful of our cultural values? And so this is just something I encourage us all to maybe think about selecting one each week or selecting one each lesson to tie into whatever content you're covering. So I'm really adamant about this, and probably I have one student who I had in 3 classes last quarter, and she's like, oh my gosh, on and on with the cultural values. But she's also one who really carries that in the way that she lives her life. So it's a give and take relationship in my classes, and we're always reminding each other of these values. And so getting back into kind of what is it that we can learn from our plant and animal relatives. So for us, and I was talking to my dad earlier today about this, is I said, oh, Dad, do you have anything that I should add to this presentation? And we were sitting at lunch and he's going through it, and he's like, the slide before this, he said, oh, you know what you need to add? Make sure you add in. He said, you know, we didn't follow a calendar like, oh, it's January, that means we need to go do this. And I said, wait, Dad, and you know, I couldn't cut him off because he was continuing to talk. So he went on and on to explain, you know, we followed the seasons. We listened to how the ice was melting. We listened to how the ice was melting. We didn't just watch it. We saw how the snow progressed up the hills as it melted away, how the streams began to fill, how the fish began to come back. The birds, swallows, these kind of real flighty birds, come back when the salmon are coming back. They're our warning sign that they're coming back, and we have a story for that. And so he's really, you know, went on this as a 30-year-old, you know, he went on this long drawn out explanation when I wanted to say, yes, Dad, I know it's on the next slide. But he, you know, he really explained it, and I think I appreciated that, because 1, it reminds me that my dad will always be my teacher, and 2, you know, he talked about a lot of things that I could visualize and that I could smell and that I could feel, you know, I've seen and felt these things my whole life. And so it just brought me back to these places that just gave me a moment to really be with the land and be with the place that I've known and loved. So our plants and animal relatives, if we just take the time to sit and listen to them, observe them, or even in the classroom research them, they have mountains of knowledge for us to learn. And so that's kind of how our story starts as Nimiipuu is. There's a story there that you can read maybe later on, but I'm going to summarize it. Coyote knew that there was going to be people coming. He was told that, you know, there's going to be human people coming. And so he gathered all of the animal people, called a great council. He called all the fish, all the birds, the insects, all the mountain animals, all the prairie animals. He called everybody together and said, you know, there's going to be these human animals coming, and they are going to be naked and helpless and not know how to do anything really. And so all the animals came forward one at a time and said, you know, what I can offer. So deer was one of the first ones to come forward, and he said, I'll offer my skin for them as clothing so they can be warm and protected. And they can also use my horns for tools. And then next up came, you know, some of the other deer and elk and bighorn sheep, moose. Each of them stepped forward as well and said, here's the things that I can offer. Also came forward were the fish. So salmon came up and said, what I can provide is nourishment to these people. You know, the protein that I can carry is something that they'll need, and the omega-3s. Maybe he didn't say that, but that's what I like to insert for my science students. You know, what I can offer is going to be different than what anybody else can offer. And so each animal down the line came forward and said, this is what I can do for these people. And as the story goes, Coyote came, and he was a little bit late, and he's like, well, I want to be like an eagle, and you know, I want to carry the prayers up for the people. And the creator's like, no, that's already taken. You got to think of something that your gift is. And he couldn't really think of anything. And the creator said, you know, well, what your gift is going to be is to teach the people. You're going to be their teacher. Good or bad, you're going to be their teacher. And in that picture there, you can see these big boulders. And these were the animals that were so late that the creator said, and what you're going to be is a reminder that you need to be on time. And you're going to sit there, and you know, you'll be stone. You want to be as slow moving as stone, well, there you'll be stone. And I have to drive past that every day on my way to work. So I'm always like, I'm not going to be late, because look at them over there. They're still sit. It's right along the the Clearwater River, a beautiful place. Our landscape is, there are stories around every corner, every river bend, every canyon, everywhere there's stories that we can learn from like this. And so that was near the beginning of our people coming. It was that we had this relationship built with these animals, and all the creator said was, in return of you guys giving basically your whole selves to these humans, they're going to take care of you. And so that solidified our relationship, our commitment to these animals and the plants as well. So when we talk about, you know, animals and plants as our relatives, that's how it came to be. So we'll take a second and look at a specific example here of snowshoe hare. And so snowshoe hare, an interesting character in our neck of the woods anyways. It's always something when we go out, especially in the fall time when they're slowly starting to turn, that it's like the kids' best I Spy game, because you got to be quick to see them. But if you do see them, it's kind of like a good omen or a blessing if you're the one who gets to spot them. And we do still hunt snowshoe hare for their furs and for their meat. And this year we were able to get 3. 3 were offered up to us as they were darting across, you know, the fields and the woods, and we're really thankful for that because it's not every year that we even see them. So for us to get 3 this year was really nice and valued by my family. So snowshoe hare, I really like these pictures here, action shots with their big feet, and those 2 on the right with the different colors. So one is definitely a little more camouflage than the other. Maybe it was the first snow. We don't know, but they're definitely interesting. So in thinking about how can we bring our plant and animal relatives into the classroom and the genius of these relatives, what are some lessons that you might be able to bring into your classroom just from what you know of snowshoe hare and maybe just your observation of these pictures?
So we're going to put you into some small groups to discuss, and then I will reshare that prompt once you're in your room. So you'll see an invitation in just a minute. And a few people won't see an invitation. They'll just stay in the main session with C and me. Looks like almost everybody's joined.
All right, so is this who's in this room?
Yes.
People are still checking over.
People might be checking over, but
Okay.
there, I think everybody's in their rooms now.
All right. Well, I definitely don't want to be the one to answer. So if anybody else wants to chime in and maybe offer up what they are thinking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Is
okay.
This is Julie?
This is Julie. I wasn't sure. I didn't see an invitation or anything. I wasn't sure if maybe because I'm in my browser that it didn't work, but great. Hi. So the first thing that came to mind for me about what the snowshoe hare can teach us is about camouflage and being hidden to survive. I'm not sure if that's what you meant by your question, but that was the first thing that popped into my head.
Yeah, good. Anybody else have a thought?
I see Rick typed into the chat for everyone to see adaptations that help them to survive, such as their speed, fur for warmth, incredible ears. So kind of the similar idea to what Julie said.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. I'll just add that I think it's great when the kids make observations like that, and then you know, maybe the light bulbs go off and they want to do a little more in-depth research to find out about you know, what specific characteristics of their fur or you know, their ears, whatever, help them to survive, so they can go deeper and then report back to the rest of the class.
Yeah, that's great. It works at all levels.
Yeah, so true.
Looks maybe like Susan, maybe you wanted to share something?
Hi, Susan, are you there? Oh, we might be having a bad connection.
Okay, Deborah? Hopefully it's not my connection.
No, Oh, she's typing in the chat. She said she teaches 5th grade and the hare can teach us about camouflage.
Good. All right, well, if nobody else would like to share, maybe we can bring everyone back in and see what it is that I thought about. So I'll give Leah a second to do that. thank you to those who shared. And if you wanted to share and it was technical difficulties, sorry about that.
Yep. A couple people messaged me in the chat and said, my computer's not working very well right now.
Oh.
So yes, please feel free to type in the chat if you, instead of sharing out if you're having technical problems.
Yeah, I don't know how the weather is over there, but over at main campus, they've been closed a couple days this week, which is in Bellingham. And my friend said it snowed 24 hours there.
Wow.
And she didn't have power last night. So
All right, we'll
I'm not
have
sure where everyone's calling in from, but maybe that's some of the reason. Weather.
we'll have everyone back in about 10 seconds.
All right.
That's when they get the boot.
I like that it gives you a warning.
Yeah. All right, we should have everybody back now.
All right, cool. Okay, so I hope you guys had good conversations and at least got your brain thinking much like your students usually are when you introduce something brand new. You know, I don't know the last time anybody else thought about snowshoe hare prior to this presentation. So that's something to even be mindful of, is taking time to think about things that maybe you don't think about all the time in our bustling, busy schedules. So one thing I wanted to bring up was snowshoe hare itself. So that name, snowshoe hare. So of course, snowshoes, that was a great invention of ours, like many other people across the world, developing shoes that could hold themselves on the snow. So this is a design of ours, how things were held together with different bindings and straps made from sinew and deer hide. And then also the round part was most likely willow. So pretty lightweight, bendable, and you could fashion something up and trot on top of the snow, much like the snowshoes. If you look at it in comparison to the jackrabbit hindfoot, they're definitely built for speed, the jackrabbits, and not so much to hold you up on the snow. I can just, in my head, picture, and you might challenge your students to do this too, imagine a jackrabbit with skinny little feet trying to run through the snow. Probably be quite the faceplant exposition there. But the reason why I had the jackrabbit or cottontail rabbit is because one of our stories tells us about their relationship to one another. And so, like I said at the beginning, you know, it's not always about having to find these resources or come up with them yourselves. A lot of times, I think all I typed in was Nez Perce and snowshoe hare, and this is what I had found. And I'd seen this before, but I knew it was available. I just didn't have this on hand. We're also fortunate here that we have the Nez Perce National Historical Park. So a national park that is completely, and its whole purpose is to tell the story of the Nez Perce people. So that's something that we're fortunate to have here. And then before I get into the story, aside from knowing whose homelands you are on, working with Indian Ed coordinators in your district or in your state, I think we have a couple of people from different states on here, is really important to access this information, local tribes. I even working in my own community, anytime I reach out to somebody in our tribal offices, they're more than happy to come share. So I'm more than happy to get out from behind that desk and share with our students. So I encourage you guys to do that. Nonetheless, there's these online resources. So this legend of snowshoe and cottontail rabbit, and again, talking to my dad about this, that first slide, he said, oh, you should tell that story or this story. And, oh, look in this book, there's another story. And I said, Dad, and before I could tell him, like, I have a story already picked out that I want to share. And this one goes back to kind of that camouflage. And so the snow had fallen, and cottontail rabbit and snowshoe, they once lived together, and they're friends or brothers, you might say. But one time they split up, and snowshoe hare got stuck up in the mountains in the winter, and cottontail went back down to the valley where he often spent his time. And so winter comes and goes, and spring returns, and snowshoe rabbit comes down from the mountains. They meet in the middle up on the prairie, and they say, "Oh, I worried about you this whole winter," said, Snowshoe Hare said that to Cottontail. And he said, I didn't know how you were doing, and I would look out across the valley and think, I wonder how Cottontail Rabbit's doing out there. And similarly, Cottontail Rabbit was thinking the same thing. Oh, all that snow, I wonder how Snowshoe Hare is doing. And they shared with one another that they were able to take care of themselves by building these fires and putting their backs to the fire to keep warm. And they both said, oh, you had nothing to worry about. We both made it safe. But from that day, they said, this is the way I'm going to live my life now. And we are going to be separate during these times. And so they did that. They had made this pact with one another, you can say, that says, I'm going to live up in the mountains and take care of, that area. And I'm going to stay down in the valleys and take care of that area in the time that we are apart. And then over the years, that time apart became forever apart. So that's kind of the story of Cottontail and Snowshoe Hare. And when I read that a couple of years ago, I also thought about something else, and that's the fur of Cottontail. So one, this touches on the camouflage, because in the story it says, I will turn myself white, so then nothing else can see me, and so I won't be preyed upon. And Cottontail, has all of his same coloring, so he can hide in the brush and whatnot and not be seen. Because if he was bright white down in the valleys, he would surely be seen. So it was really interesting when I was thinking about this. Leah and I planned this, I don't know, like several months ago. But so I've been thinking about it, and when things came up, I'd write down my little notebook of what it was that I wanted to share. And after thinking of that story and then seeing this post, this was on the January 13th. They had one a couple, maybe a couple months ago as well. But it said, during the coldest times of the year, Nimiipuu men and women would wear clothing made from the skins of animals. One common animal used for clothing was rabbit. This beautiful rabbit fur cape would have been an especially warm piece of clothing during the long winter months. This cape is made from 5 rabbit skins sewn together, backed with red wool cloth, and decorated with various buckskin tassels of beads and shells. And so when I think about Snowshoe Hare saying, I put my back to the fire and it was warm in the wintertime. I saw this cape and I thought, we also put our backs to the fire, and we also cover ourselves with that fur that Snowshoe Hare used, and it keeps us warm in the winter months. And so I really want to go down to the museum and see this piece and see, the intricacies of it and how it was sewn and what it was sewn together with, because I think that's just as important as the piece as a whole, is every little piece of it that was brought together. So there's one more picture of it kind of laid out, and you can see there the different sections that were sewn together, and even little spots where maybe the tails were. So I really appreciated this piece, and that the park is always sharing artifacts like this. And a couple of us have been talking about, like, man, we should make something like that. How cool would that be? Not just to be seen, when dancing at a powwow or for regalia, but as something that we honor every day. And so I remember growing up, I had this little purse, and it was made from snowshoe hare. And I treasured that thing. And of course, our cat always wanted to play with it because it was, a rabbit. And I still have that. And I really cherish that piece because it carried so much, I guess, just like closeness for me. I always felt like really home and safe with that piece. So, and thinking about snowshoe hare, I guess if we can break out into our classrooms now, what are some classroom activities, and how might you compile just the information presented into something that you can do in your classroom?
All right, so I'm going to put the prompt in the chat and then open up our breakout rooms again.
All
So you should see an invitation, unless you don't, in which case you're in the main session with C and me. Okay, I think most people are in their rooms now.
All right. And I pulled up the chat this time so I can see if anybody types in. Anybody want to jump in that has an immediate thought?
Something that Rick said earlier made me think about the fur that's on the screen now, about maybe the students, I'm not sure how they would do this, but testing the insulating properties of different furs. Like how does rabbit compare to bear, compare to elk, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's
But
a great
I'm
idea,
also,
really.
yeah, I'm not,
Inquiry. Mm-hmm.
but where would it fit? You know, like when I think about things like this, my mind goes one way, but then I try and figure out how to make it fit into the standards, and then I mean, I could probably come up with something, but it just feels like a whole different way of thinking to look at it through the lens of the standards, you know, as opposed to looking at it through the lens of like learning about the world around you.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many standards. I mean, you got structure and function, you can tie in evolution, you could do engineering, and maybe the kids are trying to design a warm insulating thing using biomimicry, inspired by these awesome rabbit pelts. You know, it's kind of infinite possibilities.
Yeah, yeah. So looking at it, kind of stepping back and not looking at the specific performance expectations, but looking more at like the cross-cutting concepts. Then.
Yeah, and you can go specific too, I'd say,
Yeah.
with the standards.
Mm-hmm.
Something I've been playing with is just thinking about if we're starting with a phenomenon, what is a phenomenon that's really rooted in place? Because I think that's one piece that feels important. So not looking at like exotic animals on a different continent, but what's happening in our backyard that students see every day. And I think if we do have students who are indigenous in our classrooms, that's a way of looking around at the world that they might feel like, you know, familiar with. So that's something that I've been thinking about.
Right. Like even if you can't find an amazing artifact like this for hands-on, I mean, this is pretty uniquely awesome. But just, yeah, whatever, you know, maybe you can find a little skull of an animal, you know, near the school or something, or you can find different plant sleeves, you know, lots of different things that the kids can be looking at, you know, structure and function again for an example. I love to use skulls. One of my favorite activities is to use a bunch of skulls, predators and prey animals, etc., and then have the students compare them and think about, you know, placement of the eyes and what that tells you about how this animal makes a living, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Those are all really good examples that I might just use in my classroom.
Excellent. This is Rick again. I did a curriculum for sagebrush ecosystems where we have a lot of these types of activities in it. So you can find that if you just Google sagebrush ecosystem curriculum, it'll come up. It's for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay.
Feel free to link it in the chat too, and if you want to.
Oh, sure. We'll do.
Great. So is everybody back in this main room?
Not yet. I will close it now.
Okay. Yeah, I just think, I mean, I don't have very much planning time, but if I had time to just bounce ideas off people, that would be great. So like I said earlier, I'm 50% learner in anything I go into. So I appreciate you guys sharing.
I'm not too familiar with with snowshoe hares, but I used to be a park ranger out on the coast on Washington. And we have a rabbit out here that I tried to identify, and it kept coming back as snowshoe hare, but it doesn't change white in the winter. Are anybody in the room familiar with rabbits out on the coast?
Doesn't sound
I'm-
like it.
Yeah, so I wondered if it really is a snowshoe hare, that there's another story there that the students might be able to work on figuring it out. Like, why would a snowshoe hare in one part of the world change white and one in another part of the world not?
Right. Yeah, and I will say I've been so fortunate to, anytime I've reached out to Idaho Fish and Game, the Nez Perce Tribe's Wildlife Division, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, everybody has been really responsive in helping us either figure out what's the species or getting more information on whatever it is that we're curious about. So I'll just quickly tell a story. Over the summer, we had an adult camp for Nimiipuu tribal members and community members, and we had Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife, Idaho Fish and Game, Winchester Lake State Park. We had all sorts of different partners involved. And what was really interesting was that in our family, we have a really old dress, a really old buckskin dress. And I mean, it's dated, I don't know how far back, but it's a museum. It should be in a museum. My sister and I have it, and we had it kind of looked at, and somebody said, oh, that's bighorn sheep. And we thought, oh, wow, how rare, and then this summer we were told by Idaho Fish and Game in one of their presentations, like, no, this area there used to be hundreds of thousands of bighorn sheep, and elk and deer were rare. And
Wow.
so that was like really eye-opening. I thought, oh, no wonder all the old dresses were bighorn sheep. It wasn't some prestigious thing. It was everybody had them. So really interesting to think about that. So I've ever since being told that, I'm like always trying to tie in the experts, because I know a little bit about a lot of things, but these guys know a lot about a couple things, and that's really valued. So encourage you to work across the table with them. So a couple of things I thought about, again, just to kind of emphasize the cultural values, bringing something in if you feel comfortable doing that, or having students themselves have that list up in your classroom and have them select something that they think is important and explain why. Why is it tied to adaptation? Why is it tied to respect? I think those are really valuable for students to be able to identify themselves. A couple ideas, engagement, name. So this might be a way to start a lesson with it. Name all the plant and animal species you know in your area. And so I just did this with my ecology class, just on insects. And the next day we had a speaker come in, and she was talking on and on about dragonflies, and all of us were like, we didn't even think about the dragonflies. So that's always a good one to get everyone's brain thinking and work in group and bounce ideas off one another. Exploration. So this was something I thought of, and maybe it's because we also have a regalia making class here on Tuesday nights, but what could be a design based only on naturally offered products or materials, so, or naturally produced. So thinking about, how might you make a jacket if all you could use was things that was produced naturally. And without any modern technology, sewing machines, things like that, how would you make that? Have students kind of explore that idea, and what does that look like in their head? Then focus in on a species, and then provide introductory information. Share traditional stories. A lot of traditional stories can be found online. More so would be, the best bet would be to reach out to the tribal community nearest you. Wisdomoftheelders.org also has traditional stories on there. Northwest Indian Storytellers Association. But you can search in this day and age. There's TED Talks that have traditional stories. They're out there and available if you take a little bit of time to look. So, and I think those, in my experience, have been really transformative, especially for students who may have never heard them before. Introducing new vocabulary, concepts, and evaluation. I do this with my college students. They compile information into portfolios, so they become the expert on, we had somebody do rattlesnakes for our animal biology class, and not only learn about all the content that we were required to teach in that course, but the cultural aspects of it, the historic context of it, and then anything that's been in the news, because that's usually pretty interesting. What is it that they're talking about in the news, and rattlesnakes, especially in the winter months. So there's a couple ideas to throw out there. A couple more. Somebody had mentioned engineering design challenges, climate change considerations. I think that's always a good way to tie into the standards. So here's just on this right-hand page, it talks about snowshoe hare faces a new threat, warmer winters. Are they able to change their fur fast enough? Ancient designs in the modern world, that fur cape might go worth quite a bit of money, even if it was made in modern times. So it might be a new fashion statement. Population dynamics, thinking about the bighorn sheep story I just shared. And then habitat healing and protection, or restoration and preservation. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about, even if you just think about one species in your local environment. So I think I just really encourage everybody to take time to explore that. I know we only have a few more minutes left, but tule was another and is one of our really foundational plants, I guess you can say. Some historic pictures, some modern pictures. Before we used hides of animals for our teepees, we actually had what were called longhouses, and they were covered in these tule mats. The beautiful thing about tules was that they grow in wetlands, but when we put them around our structures, in the summertime, they would dry up and create this nice ventilation. So it would be nice and cool within our structures. In the wintertime, or when it rained, they would swell up because of the moisture, and they would be water resistant and keep all the water out. And so in my mind, I'm like, that's genius, Here I am paying what kind of energy bill in the winter to keep my house warm, and energy bill in the summer to keep it cool, when here we had a great system in place before. And we learned that way from the plant itself, but also from the birds and the other animals who taught us how to build structures. So a lot of this was pulled from the Nez Perce National Historical Park. It's a great resource. I have the link here at the end. But in today's day, it's something that we need to be thinking about with not only changing climates, but the development of lands, landscapes, and invasive species. So when we see tule patches, we really work hard to preserve or restore them. And of course, we get our youth out and active in doing that, as well as our adults in our summer camp. And some modern takes on it, building, a little kayak out of tules, and then duck decoys even. And this mat across the bottom here is what we would traditionally serve our food in the longhouse. So kind of our ceremonial ways is what we serve our food on. So I don't think we'll have time to break up one more time. I'm kind of wanted to spark your guys' interest in really looking at what it is these plants and animals have to offer us, because they really are the geniuses, and we're still kind of in our infancy in learning about these things. Let's see, oops, minimize that there. The last one I'll touch on is beaver. I've always had a really close relationship with beavers. We have a story about how beaver stole the fire from the pines. It actually started over in Oregon and brought fire all the way over here. That's how the Grand Ronde River got its shape. And then, there's scientists now, Western scientists coming out with these stories that are beavers nature's little firefighters. And we all know what amazing structures they build. And just this relationship between beaver and fire has always been something interesting, and that I like to say that our legends and our stories tell us we've known for since time immemorial. Before anyone can remember, it's been known that this is a relationship. So always looking to nature for answers and questions and what it is that they have, known and practiced in their lifespans and pass on to their generations and generations, whether it be plants or animals, trees, and then for us, even the water, the memory that water carries. So I'm not sure if we have any time for questions or not, but here's a couple links for resources that I pulled from. Salmon and, I'll start at the top, Nez Perce National Historical Park. They have a couple different educators guides. That's the one that I referenced here, and it is still that way. The council story came from the University of Idaho, link there. Salmon and His People is a book published by the Nez Perce Tribe. There's an excerpt of it that you can find at that link. And then Washington State University, link there at the bottom, has videos and talks about tule mats. So you can check that out there as well. All right, so that brings us to the last slide. I think we may have just a few minutes for questions or comments.
And I put a link in the chat for our exit survey. So if anyone wants to get a PDU for attending, please complete that for us.
All right, so I'm just reading over the comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if I didn't get to learn from you. So I really do appreciate that. You guys gave just as much as you received tonight. So that's really honored. So.
Yeah, I don't know if this is as much of a question, but just something I've had on my mind, that the storytelling and bringing in the cultural pieces and centering that, it just takes time, and we teachers always feel like there isn't enough time, but I feel like the engagement that you get when we can spend the time on incorporating those pieces is really key. And so I don't know if anybody else feels that tension, but that's just something, knowing the reality of the classroom, that always is on my mind, is how to balance the demands with getting through all the material, but also understanding that the cultural relevance piece is really key to engaging all of our students, and incorporating things like storytelling, which we know takes time, like how to make that work.
Yeah, I always like to start out the class either with the cultural value or the story, and then end back with the cultural value and either a story or the news article that keeps it relevant to us right here in this time and space. So I think that's really important, and I do hear the struggle of most teachers to do that. Fortunately, I'm at a tribal college, so it's part of what we are expected to teach. So I really, really love my job here.
I got a lot of questions about the recording. Yes, we will have it on our website, so you'll be able to view it again. Oh, we have a question from Julie. How do you incorporate the values into the conversation?
So there's a lot of different ways, but one way I like to just start out is put it up on the board, respect. What does that mean? And then have the students develop a mind map or a concept map of what does that mean? And then use that as a leading in point to say, well, how might beaver and respect, what might beaver and respect have to do with each other? And then from there, students start making connections. Then they really start thinking about beaver and, you know, what do I even know about beaver? And then they have all sorts of questions about beaver, and there you are in 10 feet deep and on a roll. Yeah, I see the question about stories. Like I said, I would always try and find an Indigenous person telling the story that's theirs online on a recording if you're not able to. Have somebody come in and share it themselves. or publications by tribes or indigenous people themselves that share the stories. So there's actually literature out there on how to go about that. And again, I'd reach out to the Indian Ed program in your district or in your state, and they will be able to help lead you through that process if you want to have someone by your side to do that. So I really commend Oregon for what they've been doing. And I just want to say that the Nez Perce Tribe, the Nimiipuu, are also, since our homelands stretch into Oregon, I always like to remind people that we are an Oregon tribe, whether the state recognizes that or not. So just, you can always think about tying in anything from our community, because our homelands surely stretched as far as you are. So don't be bound by the imaginary lines.
Any other questions from folks? Thanks so much for joining us in the evening after work. I know it's a really long day, but we really appreciate you. And we will be sharing all of the links and everything. Once people fill out the exit survey, I will be emailing you with your PDU certificate, and we'll include links to access the recording and all the materials on our website. So you'll hear from us soon.
Thank you guys. Katsiyayo.
Thank you.